Rusty's been a little bit clingy, aren't you? Because I abandoned you for 2 whole weeks. If you follow me on Instagram, you probably already know this, but I've basically spent the last 2 weeks on a cruise around the Canaries. I selfishly went and left you, didn't I? Yes, you going and had to stay with other people. And speaking of selfish, I see Nikon waited until 2 days after I'd set sail, and then they announced the Z50. So I couldn't actually make a video on it until now. Right, I need to put you down now. Okay? I need to put you down? Yes? Okay. But the Z50 is a pretty interesting camera because it goes pretty much toe-to-toe with the Sony A6100 and the Canon M6 Mark II, which were both recently announced. But which of these cameras should you buy? Well, realistically, none of these cameras are going to persuade you to shift from one system to another. I.e., if you're already a Sony shooter, the release of the Z50 is not exactly going to make you sell all your Sony gear and buy into Nikon. These cameras are more of a talking point for people already in the respective ecosystems, i.e. if you're already with a Nikon DSLR and you're looking at moving into mirrorless but you didn't want a full frame setup, the Z50 is the answer to that. Or people who are looking at buying their first interchangeable lens camera and have no lenses or anything to go with it. Which one should you buy into? Nikon, Canon or Sony? Well, in terms of specs, there's not really a huge difference between them all. The Sony A6100 uses the pretty commonly found 24 megapixel sensor that's in the A64, A65 and A6600. The Z50 employs a 20 megapixel sensor, which I'm not sure if it's the same sensor that's in the D500 or if it's a brand new sensor, and if it's a brand new sensor it's made by Sony anyway. And the Canon employs a 32.5 megapixel sensor, so in terms of resolution the Canon has the edge. In terms of shooting speeds, you've got Sony and Nikon capable of doing up to 11 frames a second burst, while the Canon can do up to 14. But again, realistically, none of these cameras are really that well suited for sports and wildlife shooting. Just because it advertises they can go up to those shooting speeds, they are only in ideal circumstances, and more often than not in fast situations where subjects are moving around, you don't get close to the max advertised shooting speeds. And the autofocus systems on the cameras are all pretty competent as well. The mirrorless, the sensor-based technology is just going on leaps and bounds these days. Sony arguably leading the way, introducing the IAF, the animal IAF, etc, etc. Canon aren't that far behind with the dual pixel autofocus now that they've improved the IAF performance, and Nikon are seemingly catching up as well. So all three of them, there will be slight differences, but for most people, you're not going to notice any difference. None of the cameras come with in-body stabilization either, which is a pity, especially for that Z50, given the whole reason behind the Z mount is that huge diameter mount opening. I mean, look how much room that sensor's got to move. Christ, with a full frame lens, you could get like 83 stops of VR there. You could start hand-holding your astrophotography shots. Another issue is the screen. Now, all three of these cameras give you the ability of having a front-facing screen, which is great for vlogging, taking selfies, or even in some scenarios where you're in a restricted space, maybe a small room, you're trying to get as much of the room in view as possible. You might have to wedge the camera up on a tripod in the corner of the room, and you can't get behind the camera to see the screen, so you flip the screen up and forward. I've had to do that a few times. Now, both the Sony and the Canon go with the screen going up and over the top. The Z50, however, has taken the system that Canon employed in the old M5, where the screen flips 180 degrees down, which for me is stupid. Because if I'm vlogging or taking a selfie, generally I tend to hold the camera under the lens to try and get as much balance as possible. And there, I can't see the screen. Or if you put it on a tripod, you can't see the screen. Now, I know some people will argue that with this setup, it's not ideal either, because the shoe mount's blocked, so if you want to put a microphone in there, you're blocking the screen. True. However, there are plenty of aftermarket solutions that allow you to move the mounting point of the microphone. There aren't that many that let you change the mounting point of the tripod. The Viewfinders is another arguable difference between the three cameras as well. The Z50 and the Canon M6 both employ EVFs with resolutions around about 2.3, 2.4 million dots, which is very similar to the resolution found in the A6400. The A6100, however, only has a 1.4 million dot EVF, so is a much lower resolution. From a stills perspective, that's not ideal. From a video shooting perspective, it's probably less of a problem because you tend to use the LCD more than the EVF. And that's arguably another drawback of the Canon M6 Mark II. Because unlike the Sony, where it's got the EVF built into the camera body and the screen flips up and around it, the M6 Mark II doesn't have a built-in EVF, it has an additional EVF that fits into the shoe mount. Which means if you then want to flip the screen up, you've got to take the EVF off, and then if you want to switch back, you've got to put the EVF back on. It's just a lot of faffing that shouldn't really be there. Arguably, Canon should have stuck with the design like the M50, which is the more logical one of a built-in EVF, and if you can't get a screen to go up and over it, you go around the side. The most interesting difference in specs between the Nikon, Canon and Sony for me is the recording limit. Both the Nikon and the Canon still employ 30-minute recording limits while the Sonys have ditched them. And that was one of the big reasons for the A6400 for me. It's because generally when I'm shooting these videos, I'd ramble on for longer than 30 minutes, and so otherwise I'd have to keep getting up and stopping, which I've incidentally just had to do. And then there's the price point. The Z50 is priced at $860 or £850. Fairly competitive. The A6100 for US buyers is quite a bit cheaper at $750. UK buyers, not much of a difference at £830. Now the M6 Mark II, $850, £870 UK. So for UK buyers, the three are all fairly similar. The big important difference, however, is that the M6 Mark II price doesn't include the EVF module. So the M6 Mark II might be similar in terms of specs to the three cameras at the same price point, but that doesn't include an EVF. And frankly, you'd be pretty foolish to buy a mirrorless camera without an EVF, because the EVF is one of the biggest appeals of a mirrorless camera. Factor in the EVF, the price goes up quite a bit more. So between the three, the M6 Mark II is arguably the best spec'd camera, but is also the most expensive. The A6100 is best if you are on a really tight budget, or if you're primarily going to be shooting video. The Nikon finds a much better balance all round between stills and video and price, and has potentially better ergonomics because of that larger grip. But what about the systems as a whole? Because it's no good just buying one camera body, you need some lenses to go with it. Now Nikon are at a slight disadvantage here, because this is their first APS-C mirrorless camera, so they've only got two native lenses to go with it at the minute. And there's only even a handful of native Z-mount lenses full stop, because obviously they've only just got the Z6 and Z7 as well. Sony has a much bigger lineup because their E-mount splits between both APS-C and full frame. As a result, between Sony and all the third-party manufacturers as well, there's a total of some 239 native E-mount lenses that you can buy today, of which 89 of them are APS-C specific. The Canon EFM mount, however, is specific only to APS-C. Full frame, they've got the RF, and the two aren't compatible with each other. So for native EFM lenses, you have a choice of only 58, Canon or third party. So native lenses, Sony is well ahead of the curve, but they've been investing a lot more into it. No doubt in a few years those figures are going to level out a little bit. But then this brings up that old problem of what the hell are Canon going to do? Because Sony and Nikon have both lined themselves up perfectly that all of their cameras, full frame and APS-C, are sharing a single mount. So it's exactly like it used to be with the DSLRs. I.e., most people when they first bought a DSLR probably went for the APS-C options and a few APS-C lenses, and then you find the APS-C lenses aren't really filling what you want, and you can't get what you want in APS-C, so you buy full frame, and then you can buy a full frame camera. It's a marketing spiral that I fell into. I imagine quite a few people did the same as well. But Canon can't do that because they've segregated their APS-C and their full frame. I.e., you don't want to buy straight into the really expensive full frame stuff, you start off on the APS-C. But then you buy the camera body, you buy a load of EFM lenses, and then you decide you want to progress onto full frame, you've got to sell everything and replace it all in one go, and that's a big hit financially. And it also opens you up to the possibility that if people are selling all their gear anyway, there's nothing to stop them from moving on to another system. Now, yes, there is the argument that, well, you can adapt lenses. So Canon have the largest collection of native DSLR lenses on the market, and you can mount both of those onto the EFM cameras and the RF. So you buy an EFM, you buy a load of EF glass, then when you want to switch to RF, you just have to change the body. Fair enough. But it kind of completely negates the point of the EFM in the first place, because Canon have focused those cameras at being small, compact cameras, ideal for travel, etc. And a 30mm adapter plus a stonking great big DSLR lens isn't really the most travel-friendly setup going. So I imagine even if Canon weren't considering doing this in the first place, the introduction of this new Z50 is probably going to force their hand into releasing an aps-c RF mount camera and separating the two lineups completely. But who do you think has the strongest system at the moment and looking towards the future? Nikon, Sony, or Canon? Leave your thoughts and comments in the box down below. Thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.